I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we're talking about setting sewing goals for the new year in a way that actually feels good. So we'll cover a simple process for reflecting on what worked last year, identifying how you want to feel about your sewing, and creating just a few meaningful goals that support those feelings rather than adding pressure to your creative life. All right, Haley, tell me about a time when you set a goal for your sewing and then completely changed your mind halfway through. Tell me what happened.
Okay. So I have so many knit scraps. I think it's because knits come in like such wide widths that I always end up with 18 inches near the selvage that are just unused.
It's so true.
So one time I had this idea that I was going to make underwear out of all of my knit scraps because it was kind of like the perfect width to fit them into. And I was really excited about the goal. And one weekend I was like, I'm going to perfect my patterns, my couple patterns I want to use, and I'm going to make 10.
Yeah.
I thought it was such a great goal. I bought all this elastic, and this is the only thing I needed to buy. And I perfected the patterns, and I sewed the first 3 pairs. And I'm like, I'm bored. This is boring.
It does sound like such a good idea on the surface of it. And then thinking about actually doing it, I could see where it would get really boring.
I feel like it would have been a really great thing as a palette cleanser between every project. I sew 1 or 2 new underwear. I think my approach was off. And then I just was so disheartened by the whole thing that I abandoned ship. And I maybe have sewn up 1 pair of underwear since. I do like sewing undergarments, but it really put a bad taste in my mouth.
You're like, never again.
Never again.
No more
Over
underwear.
It was around the time we put out the Fable underwear. So this was a couple years ago, which is a great underwear pattern.
Yeah.
I stand by it.
Actually, now I want to make underwear.
You should.
I do have a lot of knit scraps.
Don't make all of them, though.
No, 2 pair.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's
totally.
enough.
So that's what comes to mind for me. What about you?
For me, I was thinking about, I took a sabbatical for a month a couple years ago, and I had all these plans. I was going to do all this sewing and crafting and making stuff the whole time. I was really excited about it. But then I adopted my puppy, Lucy.
Aw, Lucy.
And the entire month was just puppy. Anybody who's had a puppy knows that they can be a lot of work. And she was my first dog ever. So I had no idea what I was getting into with a puppy. So yeah, that was quickly abandoned. And that was fine. Sometimes you just have to shift gears when life gets in the way and there are more important things to do.
Yeah, totally. They're babies. They're baby dogs.
Baby animals.
So it makes sense that they are demanding as babies tend to be.
Yeah. They're just so confused and helpless.
Same. Sometimes same.
Yeah. So Lucy was my project for that sabbatical. All right. Well, if you have an icebreaker for us for a future episode, you can leave a question in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, and we'll answer it in a future episode. We're actually getting lots of nice comments and questions on Spotify lately. So thanks to all of you listeners who've been leaving comments there. I finally figured out how to log into the Spotify creator account, which I hadn't realized was a whole thing. So I'm able to answer those comments now, which is kind of nice. All right, so let's get into our topic for today. There seem to be 2 camps when it comes to setting goals and New Year's resolutions that I've seen. So one group spends tons of time reviewing the past year, mapping out ambitious new goals, making sure everything's really measurable. They're the kind of people that have spreadsheets and tracking numbers and want to know exactly how many garments they'll sew, what their success rate's going to be, all that stuff. And the other group isn't into goals at all. They just think that goals lead to disappointment, and they'd rather just let their creativity flow without any kind of structure expectations. And I have been in both camps at various times in my life. So I've made really elaborate plans that felt exciting in January and then felt really kind of crushing by March. And then I've also tried the no goals approach, which, I don't know, sometimes left me feeling a little bit adrift. But I think that there is a third way, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. The thing is, I think goals can be really helpful for our sewing because they give us direction and they help us make decisions when we're feeling just kind of overwhelmed by all the possibilities. But they need to be the right kind of goals. So instead of focusing on numbers or checking boxes, what if we set goals based on how we want to feel? So both about what we're making and then the actual process of making it. So Haley, how do you usually approach goal setting for your sewing?
I would say I have two modes. Like you described, I would say I'm not like, I love a spreadsheet. I love like tracking things and all of that. Not for my goals necessarily, my personal goals.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that I am like write it down on a piece of paper and put it up next to my mood board kind of person, or no goals at all.
Yeah.
Those are my two modes. It's like goal planning light, or no goal.
Yeah.
Just vibes. What about you?
Like I said, I've kind of oscillated back and forth. Sometimes I've had no goal. Sometimes I've had really in-depth planning processes for my entire life, which that doesn't really work for me anymore. Even though I feel like it can be super helpful, and if you're the kind of person who enjoys that kind of thing and gets really motivated by it, I think it's great. And it can be really motivating for me too, but I think for me, it leads to too much of a feeling of trying to control every little aspect of my life. And that's kind of it's kind of a problem for me anyway. So I try to let go a little bit. And especially when it comes to things like sewing or hobbies or just things that are enjoyable, I don't want to turn it into something that has to be tightly controlled.
Yeah.
So I do like to have kind of a vision for where I want to go or what's important to me, what my values are, but not necessarily really in-depth step-by-step goals for things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's my approach now. And it's kind of what we'll talk about today.
What kind of goals did you set for last year?
So I was really focused last year on, I have this goal of kind of an overarching goal with no real endpoint of making my wardrobe 80% handmade, which if you've watched our YouTube channel, you guys have seen me moving towards that goal. And that was kind of a big part of my goal last year, was to just move towards that. So it's pretty fluid, no real thing I had to accomplish by the end of the year. I just wanted to keep moving towards it. So a little bit more of a process-oriented goal. That's sort of where I landed last year. What about you?
I didn't have like a sewing specific goal. I had more of like a life theme of keeping things small. I was just in 2025 has been like a really busy year for me, and I had other personal goals that I was working on. So everything else needed to just fit in around that. So how I embodied that in my sewing was I just, I'm a creative person. Like, it's really easy to get your ideas run away from you. And I focused on the ideas that were small and achievable. And a lot of that was like little home deck projects or sewing a pair of like leggings for my daughter, or I made a few garments for myself throughout the year. I just kept it really small. And it was nice to have like a theme, not a goal. It was like a guiding principle.
Yeah.
And I really liked that.
I did the same thing, actually. My kind of overarching theme for 2025 was ease and trying to make things a little bit easier on myself and to just recognize ease in my day-to-day life. And I found that really powerful as just having a watchword like that I could return to over and over again. I've tried that before and it didn't quite work out. Maybe the word didn't quite fit with where I was at that point in my life.
Yeah.
But for some reason, this last year, it really did. It really like clicked with me.
Yeah. It's nice when it can be kind of like this rubric by which you like make choices in your life or in your creative process. And to me, when I hear ease, that like really does that.
Yeah.
Same with like keeping it small. I had like my, family life that I was really focused on, and I had my one big personal goal, and everything else just had to like fit around that. And if it didn't embody small, then it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important. And this kind of coming back to that over and over again, finding ways to remind yourself of that goal or theme or that way you want to feel, I think is really helpful for me. I think in the past, when I've had a word like that I declared at the beginning of the year, I would completely forget about it within a month. So I think having a way to come back to that, whether that's, journaling or some kind of way where you can remind yourself of what you're trying to achieve, even putting it on your fridge or whatever it is.
Yeah. I
think that's really, really helpful.
Have you ever set a sewing goal that ended up making you feel like worse instead of better?
I do that all the time. Yeah, I keep doing that. But I think that's kind of a learning process too, right? Is figuring out, does this make me actually feel good? So in the fall, I did Design Your Wardrobe, and I came up with a whole lot of projects I wanted to do, and I was really excited about them. And they came out great, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I also made some home deck stuff, and I made a bag and all this stuff. And it was great, but I also kind of felt like I was rushing towards the end because I wanted to film a video and share everything that I made. And I had committed to making all this stuff, and I really wanted to finish it so I could move on to my next batch of projects for the winter. So I think sometimes I put a little bit too much pressure on myself to finish things because I said I would do them, which is not just related to sewing. And I think that's just part of the learning experience, is like recognizing that and seeing, oh, I have this kind of bad mental habit, and maybe next time I'll fix that and not do it the same way.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to learn that over and over again.
Yeah, I feel the same. Like, it's something I do all the time, and something I have like learned to ask myself is, why does it make me feel bad? What is the thing about it that is making me feel bad? Like, do I feel like I'm a failure if I don't accomplish it? Do I feel like a liar? Do I what is the thing? What is it like pointing to that makes me, that is like so upsetting to me that I can't just be like, well, oh well.
Yeah, that's so true. For me, I feel like I really hate disappointing people.
Yeah.
And it's very silly because nobody's going to be disappointed if I don't finish all the sewing projects I said I was going to make in a YouTube video.
And if they are, then that's, they can look inward regarding that as well.
Yeah. But I think if that's the story I tell myself, is that people are going to be disappointed because I said I would do it and then I didn't do it. And I know that's not true, but sometimes you just have, like I said, mental habits that you can't necessarily control. You can recognize them though.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's my approach when I find myself instead of just taking it in stride and seeing it as a learning experience, when I start really going after myself, then what is that saying?
Yeah. All right, well, let's get into our tips for setting goals for the new year now that we're in a new year. So the first one I wanted to share is doing a quick review of last year's projects. So I always love to do reviews of the last year. I think it's really fun. And I don't know, as somebody who really enjoys journaling and that kind of thing, I really enjoy kind of looking back and just seeing where things have landed. So before you set any new goals, I think this really helps. Just looking back and seeing what kind of patterns emerge from your sewing last year. So with sewing in particular, I think it can be really helpful and something that not a lot of us do. I think what's key is that you don't need to do a really elaborate analysis or just, create a whole spreadsheet around it or anything. I think just thinking through a few simple questions can be super helpful. So some of those questions I can throw out to you that might be helpful are, which projects were your favorites? Maybe you could just jot down which ones were your favorites. And then which ones were disappointing? Which ones did you, have high hopes for, but they didn't come out quite the way you wanted? Or maybe you just didn't like them in the way that you thought you would. Which ones did you actually wear the most? I think that's really helpful for me, seeing which ones were actually the most practical for me. And then which ones are still hanging in your closet and you've never worn them. So that's another one that can be really, really helpful. Sometimes you like something you made, but you just don't really have a chance to wear it. And I think that's useful too. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't make things like that. It's just something to know and recognize. And I find this really helpful because sometimes what we think we want to sew and what we actually love to wear are really two completely different things. And I think just reflecting on it can be helpful. So, for example, last year I made this really cute linen carry romper. And even though it looked really adorable on the model and the linen fabric felt really great, really breezy, really comfortable, I realized that I'm just not into such loose and kind of billowy silhouettes anymore. I just didn't feel that comfortable in it. And it really kind of made me think about my own style and helped me to kind of home in my style a little bit more. But, meanwhile, the bias cut floral dress I made from a vintage pattern has been just in constant rotation. I feel really good I just feel really good in it when I wear it. And that just tells me something about what I should prioritize with my sewing this year. So Haley, when you look back at what you made last year, do you notice any patterns?
I think that I'm finding myself getting the most wear out of the things that combined like comfort and ease with something that felt really special. I think sometimes we can get really, or I can get really like it's one or the other. Mm-hmm. And the things that married the two really ended up becoming staples in my wardrobe the most.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that too.
So the next step to this process is to ask yourself how you want to feel about your finished project. This is where we start to get into the feelings first approach of goal setting. Instead of saying like, I want to make 20 garments this year, you can ask yourself instead how you want to feel when you look at those things that you've made and really putting a name to those feelings and getting specific. Do you want to feel proud of what you made, like you accomplished something technically challenging? Or do you want to have like a real sense of joy when you wear them? That like little spark of happiness when you put something on. I feel like that was a big one for me. Or is it comfort that you're after? And feeling like a lot of ease and confidence when you're wearing the things that you make. Or it could just be about feeling creative and unique and like you're expressing yourself by wearing something that you just can't find in stores. There's no wrong answer here. I think the point is just to simply name it. I think this is so much more useful than setting a number goal because it helps you to make better decisions throughout the year. And if you know you want to feel comfortable and at ease when like the things that you're wearing, then that's going to influence what patterns you choose and what fabrics you buy. It's going to have, it's going to help you make better decisions for yourself in general. Sari, how do you want to feel about your finished projects this year?
I've been thinking about this. I think to me, what's really important is that they feel thoughtful. They feel like each one was something that I put a lot of my attention into and really kind of spent the time to think about either its function or something special about it. Kind of what you were saying, Haley, about, that marriage of practicality and something special. I think that's really important to me too. So I would say thoughtfulness is what I'm going for this year. What about you?
Yeah, I'm very much like in the same camp, and I want to embody those things that I made last year with that combination of ease and specialness. Because at the end of the day, that's the kind of stuff that like I guess you can buy, but it's not in my budget personally. And I sew for the creative outlet, but I also sew because I want something that just like isn't just like everything else.
Yeah, exactly. I feel that way too. The next tip we have, so kind of the next step in this, is to think about how you want to feel while you're sewing. So the first question is about outcome, but this one is more about process. And I think this is really important because if the process doesn't feel good, you're not going to keep doing it no matter how great the finished garments are. So maybe think about how you want to feel. Do you want to feel calm and peaceful when you sew, like it's your meditation time? Or is sewing more like your happy me time where you get to blast music and just enjoy yourself? Or maybe you like feeling really productive. You want to see progress and feel like you're accomplishing something or learning something. Or maybe it's more important for you to feel creative and expressive where you're just experimenting and playing and maybe improvising a little bit. So for me, I've realized that I feel best when sewing feels like a creative outlet rather than a checklist. When I'm making decisions about color and design, not just following instructions, but really kind of treating it as a creative design process. And that's why I love doing things like creating mood boards and playing with fabric swatches before I even start cutting. That's really important to me. But I also know people who feel most satisfied when they're working through a really challenging technique and they're building their skills. So I don't think either is better. They're just different feelings that lead to different kinds of goals. So I think it's just really helpful to think about how you want to actually feel when you're creating.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't just think of the end product. I think that's really valuable information, but thinking about the process itself can be really enlightening.
Yeah, because your time is so precious. Why not use it to feel better?
Right. And I mean, you wouldn't sew unless it was something like some part of the process that you enjoy.
Yeah.
And like really like tuning into that is valuable. The next step in this process is identifying the actions that lead to those feelings. So once you've named how you want to feel, the next step is to think about the behaviors and the actions that seem to create those feelings for you. This is where you get really honest with yourself about what actually works. So for example, if you want to feel really calm and peaceful when you sew, maybe you've noticed that happens more when you have a clean and organized space and you're not like rushing through the project and like cleaning up all the messes that you left for yourself. Or if you want to feel proud of your finished garment, maybe that happens when you take the time to like really nail down the fit before you cut into your fashion fabric. Sari mentioned that she feels really creative when she's building mood boards and crafting color palettes. So if creativity is her goal, then building those activities into her process would be like a really great way of doing that. I personally have noticed that I feel really satisfied when I'm learning something new or like pushing my skills a little bit. So for me, taking on projects that push those skills is what leads me to feeling like that feeling that I'm after of like a little bit of a challenge. So think about your own sewing history. What were you doing when sewing felt like really good for you? And what was different about those projects or that particular time period? I think that this isn't about like shoulds, like I should do this or should do that. It's about paying attention to the experience itself and like creating more opportunity to have those experiences. Sari, what have you noticed about when sewing feels best for you?
Well, I think one of the things, sometimes it's nice to kind of invert this question to see when does it not feel good and then do the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And I think when it does not feel good for me is when I'm rushing. I really do not like the feeling of rushing in my life or in my sewing life. And so anything I can do to not put time pressure on myself makes me feel really good, where I just feel like I'm getting done whatever I get done today. Maybe I have 2 hours to sew and I'll just see how far I get. Or I'm only going to do this step today. I don't have to finish, everything today. Giving myself those kinds of messages is when sewing feels best to me. What about you?
Yeah, you make a really good point about rushing. I think for me, it's like sewing feels best when I'm really striking that sweet spot between challenging enough that it's keeping me engaged in what I'm doing, but simple enough that I'm not stressed out over it.
Yeah.
At least at this moment in my life, that sewing is my time to like really unplug mentally, and things that like meet that sweet spot really do it for me right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. All right. Well, the next thing is to create 1 to 3 simple feelings-based goals. This is where it really all comes together. So you can use your answers to these questions to create just 1 to 3 goals for your sewing in 2026. I like to cap it at 3 because I find it's hard to remember more than 3 goals for an entire year. Personally, I like to cap lists of things that I need to remember at 3 because it's just really hard to remember even 4 or 5 things all at the same time.
I can't remember 5 things.
It's possible, but I feel like
me.
I feel like it's just with everything else going on in our lives, it's too much. So I think 1 goal is even better. If you can distill it down that far, maybe even just to a word like Haley and I were talking about before, that can be even better. I think the more you can remember what they are, the better off you'll be, the more you can kind of return to them like I was talking about before. So I think these goals should connect directly to how you want to feel and what actions lead to those feelings. So based on all those questions we asked before, and they don't have to be super specific or measurable. I actually think it's better if they're a little bit flexible. So for example, instead of I want to sew 12 dresses, you might say, I want to focus on comfortable, wearable projects that I'll actually reach for. Or instead of complete 1 project per month, you might say, I want to protect my sewing time so it feels peaceful instead of rushed. And I think the beauty of feelings-based goals is that they can really adapt as your life changes throughout the year. Earlier on in our icebreaker, we were talking about times where we had to abandon goals. And I think if you have one that's really flexible and is about how you want to feel, you never really need to abandon it. You just need to kind of course correct as you go to get back to that feeling. And I think that can feel a lot better. It eliminates that kind of feeling like you failed at your goal because you didn't hit some arbitrary target. Who wants to feel that way when it comes to sewing,
No.
or any creative pursuit? So, if something comes up and you can't sew as much as you planned, you don't feel like you failed. You just adjust and you keep focusing on what you're after. So let me share my 3 goals for 2026, and then you'll see what I mean, or at least how I kind of adapted this process to my own goals. So my first one is I want to sew a travel capsule wardrobe. So I'm planning to take a really big trip this year, and I want to sew a few special pieces specifically for it. And that goal is meaningful to me because I think having handmade pieces for this trip will really contribute to this kind of sense of lifelong memories that I hope to build with this trip. Every time I look back at photos, I'll see myself in things that I made with intention. And I think that just kind of adds to the specialness of it. And it gives me a clear focus. So instead of just randomly sewing things, I have this kind of wardrobe to plan around, and I can imagine how I'm going to be wearing these things and how I'll feel in them. And it just taps into my love of design and planning, which is part of what makes sewing feel creative and fun for me, like I talked about earlier. So that's my first one. My second goal is I want to replace 5 ready-to-wear items. So this one does have a little bit of a number to it, but I'm going to stay flexible with that number. So I mentioned before that I'm on a journey to have an 80% handmade wardrobe, and I don't have a timeline on that. I'm just moving towards it over time. And this year, I want to replace maybe around 5 of the ready-to-wear items in my closet with something that I've made. And it's okay if I don't hit 5. But that's kind of just what I'm moving towards. And this connects to wanting to feel proud and satisfied with my wardrobe. And it's also about intentionality. So instead of just adding more and more to my closet, I'm being really thoughtful about what I truly need and love. So what I'm thinking is, looking through my closet, there are certain ready-to-wear items in there that I really like and I actually wear a lot. And how can I remake them in a way that's even more personal, even more special. And I think 5 things feels doable without being really overwhelming. And if I end up replacing more, that's great. But 5 is just kind of like my goal, my little baseline. And then the third one is I want to make some kind of special coat or jacket this year. I really want to tackle another tailoring project this year. And my reason for that is coats and jackets I've made have been some of my most loved items for the longest time in my closet. And longevity is really important to me. I want to make things that last and that I reach for year after year, and I think with coats and jackets, that's what does it for me. They're really like investments in my wardrobe that seem to pay off over time. And there's just something about the challenge of tailoring that makes me feel really accomplished when I finish. So you might notice that these goals aren't really about numbers or timelines. One of them has a number associated with it, but I'm keeping it pretty loose. They're really about creating specific things that'll help me feel the way I want to feel about my sewing. So those are my goals. What about you, Haley? What are your goals for this year?
Okay. I also have 3 goals because I'm not good at being concise, as you all have probably noticed. So my first goal is to sew for excitement and for ease. So I want to make pieces that I really can't wait to wear. They're comfortable, they're easy, and they feel kind of special in some way. Kind of like what I was talking about earlier when I talked about like my successes from 2025. I think in the past, I've gone really hard on like sewing basics or sewing for occasions, and like neglecting the part in the middle. And what I'm really craving now is everyday clothing that feels a little bit more special. When I'm excited to wear what I make, sewing feels more rewarding and it also feels more meaningful. I think that's why I got caught up in the trap of occasion sewing, or I often do, because it's so like exciting and rewarding. Yeah. And then comfort just helps me to get the most out of my handmade wardrobe so that I actually wear what I make. So kind of focusing on the words comfort and like special when I'm selecting my projects, I think will help me do that. So thoughtful details, cool silhouettes, fabrics that I love, all while like, keeping it comfy, guys. My second goal is to follow inspiration and not pressure. So choosing projects based on curiosity and joy and not necessarily like what I think I should make or what I think like checks a specific box for me. If something feels really forced, I'm just going to give myself permission to pause and change direction. I feel like I've let that really like bring me to a screeching halt in the past. And if something is just not working, we're moving on. I don't have time.
Yeah.
For like, getting frustrated over things that don't work at this moment in my life. I think that this doesn't mean that I'm not planning my makes. I think it just means that I'm having a lot of flexibility with myself and flexibility with my plan. And I think that allowing myself that permission to like pivot keeps it playful and lighthearted. I do my best work when I'm genuinely inspired and when I'm not trying to like meet an expectation. My creativity just thrives when I follow what feels exciting. And like not like a chore.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Which I think, especially as someone who does this professionally, like in my personal sewing, I have to take, be very intentional about that piece.
Yeah. It's a little tricky for me too, because, I mentioned YouTube earlier and I'm always sharing what I make. And I hope to do even more of that actually this year and kind of share my projects even more on the YouTube channel as I, move towards this handmade wardrobe. And so that can put a little extra pressure on things. So balancing that out is really important to me and making sure it still feels fun and exciting while I'm sharing what I make rather than feeling like, oh, I have to do this because it's my assignment for this week,
Just think of it as like a plot twist, Sari, when you show up with something different than what you said.
Yeah.
And then my final goal is to create a calm sewing space. This kind of aligns with another personal goal of mine to like work on my home a little bit more in this upcoming year. So I want to work on some updates to my sewing space so that it feels like a space I want to spend more time in. My sewing space is also my office. And so sometimes when I go in there, I feel like I'm working.
Yeah.
And I want to make some environmental tweaks that hopefully make me feel better when I'm working, but also make it feel like a place I want to spend more time in. So an environment that feels like really peaceful and restorative, and a place that I can unplug from my responsibilities a bit and just play and create. I feel like I've lost track a little bit of sewing as a form of rest. And I want to come back to it being like this quiet, creative ritual that helps me to recharge, because that is how I feel when I sew.
Yeah.
How can I like entice how can I incentivize myself up front so that I can remember that I feel that way,
Yeah. The thing that helped me in 2025 with this was quilting. I had a quilting project, which I've probably mentioned to you guys on the podcast already, but I was working on a quilt that was one block as a sampler quilt, so different block every month, making a yearly quilt. And that helped me find more of that sense of restoration in sewing, because a quilt block is pretty fast, pretty easy. It lets you play with fabric, and like I just took out my scraps and would decide which colors go together and what would look good with the other blocks. And it just felt really low pressure. And also you can make a quilt block in 30 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, depending on how complicated it is. So that was a really fun way to kind of, I don't know, just make sewing feel even more playful.
Yeah, totally. I think that like the other part of like creating this calm space is like creating the environment and then also protecting my sewing time as well.
Yeah.
I have some like times that are set aside that are good for sewing, but it's just like the space is not, the vibes are off. I need to reset the vibes. So yeah, that's my third goal.
Very nice. I love those goals. I think I want to steal some of those goals, but we said 3, so I'm not going to go over. I might flip out one of mine though, because I like, especially the one about creating the calm sewing space. I would like to. My sewing space is pretty calm, but I do feel like there's some upgrades I want to make to it.
Yeah, it felt like good. I was going to stop at 2, but it felt like really, especially since it was an extension of another like personal goal of mine, it felt good to have something that was like sewing adjacent, that like supported the sewing without it being like sewing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of going back to what we were saying about process goals and how you want to feel while you're actually sewing, not just outcome. All right, well, let's recap what we talked about today. We went through quite a bit. We started by doing a quick review of last year's projects to identify patterns, what we actually loved and wore versus what we thought we would. Then we got into the feelings first approach to goal setting. So we asked ourselves how we want to feel about our finished projects and how we want to feel during the actual sewing process. From there, we identified what specific actions and behaviors tend to lead us towards those feelings. And then finally, we created just 1 to 3 simple, flexible goals based on all of that reflection. So my big takeaway is, goals don't have to feel restrictive and they don't have to set you up for disappointment. I think when they're connected to how you want to feel rather than just arbitrary numbers, they can actually support your creativity instead of feeling like they're constraining it. And, I feel like that really ties into our core beliefs at Seamwork, which is that sewing is all about decisions. And when you're really clear on how you want to feel, you can make better decisions throughout your entire creative process, including what patterns you choose, what fabrics you buy, and how you spend your actual sewing time. So what about you, Haley? What's your big takeaway?
I think that my takeaway, or maybe it's more of a next step for me, is something you said in the beginning of the episode about like how do we like revisit these goals so that they integrate like into our lives and become something that we're actually putting into practice. So now I'm kind of mulling over what's my next step? How am I make sure I put this into practice. I think that I'm going to be working on my space first, and I want to make a big cork board. So I'll probably put something up there to highlight my goals for 2026. Feels like a good place. It's where my mood board goes. So why not?
Yeah. Definitely recommend the big cork board. I have one in my sewing space and I absolutely love it. It's really fun. Well, if you're feeling inspired to set some intentions for your sewing this year, I want to invite you to join us in taking the Intentional Wardrobe Pledge for 2026. It's completely free, and it's a really simple way to commit to whatever approach really feels right for you, whether that's the goals we talked about today or something completely different. So just go to seamwork.com/go/pledge and tell us how you plan to craft a wardrobe with intention this year. And it could be as simple as I'm going to slow down and enjoy the process, or as specific as I'm going to make 5 garments for my work wardrobe, if that feels right to you. Maybe we should add a little place in there for them to put whatever feeling, whatever you guys want to put for your feeling. That would be really cool too. We'll see if we can do that. So when you take the pledge, we'll send you our free wardrobe planning kit, if you don't have it already, which has some really helpful worksheets for thinking through your plans. Plus, you'll get a 25% discount for an annual Seamwork membership, which is a pretty great deal if you've been thinking about joining our community. I really like this pledge because it's not just about, pressure or perfection in the new year. I know that can be really overwhelming at this time of year. It's just about stating your intention and having that reminder throughout the year of what you're working toward. So if this conversation resonated with you at all, head over to seamwork.com/go/pledge and pledge along with us. And if you like this episode, leave us a review. We would love to hear from you. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video, follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to become part of the Seamwork community, head over to seamwork.com to learn how to join. And that does it for us this week. I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.